Welcome to this week's episode of the Lovefly podcast. And we have the privilege today. I've been joined by Marc Parent from CAE, whom I saw speak at the IATA conference in Marrakesh last year. He was fabulous and he's been very kind to give his time today. Come talk to us a little bit about what he does and what the CAE do. So welcome, Marc. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Marc Parent, but you got it pretty close. So thank you.
I think shall I try? Yeah.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, Marc, tell us a little bit about you, what your role is. A little bit about your journey. You know the questions we're going to ask you, but yeah, that would be really interesting for people, I think.
Okay. Well, look, I guess we met because of my job. I'm the chief executive officer of CEO at a company called CAE. And if you don't know CAE, what we do is basically we train pilots. Not only pilots, aviation professionals writ large. We train, cabin attendants, for example, engineers, but largely pilots. In fact, when I talk about our company, I think the thing to remember, which is apropos for what we're talking about today, is if you've flown at any time recently, and there's about, give or take, about 100,000 flights at any given day. The chances are that the pilots that are flying your airplanes have been trained in one of our simulators that we built and delivered around the world, or in one of our training centers, which is where we met and talking about that in Marrakesh. So that's what we do. We train civil pilots, we train military pilots around the world. Myself, look, I'm one of those people that's, I guess, very fortunate that, I work in a field that I'm passionate about. I'm a pilot myself. That's not what I do for a job. Again, I'm the CEO, but I've been flying since literally that I was 17. I was flying gliders before that. So literally, I do what I love. Again, not do it for a job, but I still fly. I fly, personally, I have a float plane. So, Canada, you get to do that. You fly my own float plane to the cottage or fishing, things like that, which gives me a lot of pleasure, obviously. And I also fly, our company jet, a Phaeton business jet. So, I'm immersed in what we do at this point.
You are? Yeah. So, who checks you then? I mean, that must be pretty scary. You have the CEO in the simulator to go through your 6 monthly checks. You have to fly your business jet. They must be like terrified.
Well, I guess not really, because I'm just like anybody else when it comes to being, going through the testing that you do every 6 months to be as a pilot. And I think, to me, that's the first and foremost thing to think about, at least, well, basically to reflect upon. If you think about a pilot and the training that they have to go through, which I'm an example of, and goes to the heart of what we do at CAE. And let me just go back a little, talk about that. You ask, is it unnerving for somebody to check me out? And the answer is no, because there's a very strict and rigorous way that we go about testing pilots. And that's done the same way globally around the world. So that could should give a lot of comfort to people.
Yeah, that is comforting. So tell us about the CAE, and we do use some of your facilities. So we've hired one of your simulators in Gatwick quite a few times for different things. So I'm familiar with your kit and how great it is. But how did it all start?
You mean the company, CAE?
Yeah.
Well, actually, literally, the company traces roots right back to the Second World War, where, they had an officer from the Royal Canadian Air Force who came back from the war and basically had the idea of, he was trained in electronics, and he decided to form a company that was basically going to take advantage of the skills that he learned and was going to innovate in that field. I think so it's steeped in that passion for innovation. We did actually our first simulator in literally 1952 for a military airplane. It was an airplane designed in Canada. It was a fighter interceptor. And that was the beginning. We started building our first commercial full flight simulators in the 50s and in the 60s, and we
I
actually
didn't realize it was that long ago.
oh yeah,
I didn't know.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we actually created at CAE the standard that is still in place today, which I think still takes, if you don't know the field, and I tell people with this thing that I'll tell you, which you know, we created the standard that is called the zero flight time simulator. And what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that literally, your whole training to fly the aircraft is done in the simulator. It's done in the simulator. I am the product of that myself. You know, when I've learned to fly the jet that I fly, all of my training was done in the simulator, with the conclusion of that the first flight I did with in the real aircraft was literally with passengers in the back. Now,
So,
reflect on that. Now,
yeah.
first and foremost, I should say that my co-pilot wasn't his first flight. So first and foremost, but you wonder, does that, how confident should I feel about that? Well, I should, it goes to the realism of the simulators themselves that recreate, obviously, the magic of flight, recreating an environment, but recreating in exact detail the flight characteristics of the aircraft and all of its systems to learn how to fly the aircraft. But even more important is how to fly the aircraft when things go wrong. Okay.
Yes.
Whether, you have any failures of anything on the aircraft, and then being able to deal with that system anomaly or failure, which could be or could not be a situation requiring an emergency, but being able to deal with it and in such a way as everybody is safe in the aircraft. You cannot actually do that amount of training in the real aircraft, which is why you do it all in the simulator. Because imagine, for example, you learn how to deal with a engine that's literally on fire. Well, clearly, if you're going to train in the aircraft, you could obviously not recreate that for real. So that just gives you one example of that's the case. And again, that speaks again of the sophistication of what we do as a company. And that standard, again, is done everywhere around the world today.
That is remarkable. Yeah, as a pilot yourself, when you're in the simulator, how close does it feel to the real thing to you?
Well, I'm not getting exaggerated to. It feels the same to me. And I could tell it's absolutely the same. I literally did this last week because, again, I have to do this every 6 months. So literally last week in Dallas, Texas, I was in one of our simulation training centers where we train business aviation pilots. And I had to do my recurrent training on the business jet that I fly. So I went through the whole gamut. I did this over 3 separate flights. So 3 separate 4-hour sessions where these are not kind of normal flights. These are flights where basically in one 4-hour session, you could do the equivalent of literally tens and tens of flights on your real aircraft, because you can, for example, reposition yourself for land as an example. So in that amount of time, in that simulator, I basically went through every scenario, normal and abnormal. And I could tell you that I had arrived to the training center in our aircraft and I departed in our aircraft. And I could tell you, having done my last flight, okay, in the simulator on the same day that I was going in the real aircraft, I could literally not tell the difference. Literally. And the visuals, for example, on our new generation of systems in the aircraft that recreate the imagery that you see outside the aircraft, was as close to 2020 as you might imagine. In fact, we've incorporated gaming technology, and you know how realistic that may look, but bringing the reality of full flight simulation and being able to create that level of realism, which is really uncanny, and of course the feel of the aircraft. So I can tell there is no difference, and you would want it that way to recreate the sensation that you have. And
I find it amazing.
I absolutely, and I think to me, when you think about what that training does, and we're talking about the training of pilots here, and it's important because I go back just one minute in my career, because I think maybe it can bring some depth to what I'm going to say here. Like I talked about that. I've been passionate about airplanes my whole life. And I've had the privilege of working, obviously, in this field that I'm so passionate about, and that field has encompassed flying, like I've talked about. I've been flying against this since I was a teenager, but I also my training is as an engineer, and I
Right.
graduated. I did an aerospace mechanical engineer with a degree in aerospace as well. And when I was first hired in the first few years, I was designing systems of aircraft. I was doing aerodynamics, and eventually, in the 90s, I designed airplanes. I was the chief designer of many aircraft. I spent 20 years actually working for a manufacturer, which is now called Bombardier Aerospace.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it grew by acquisition. When I started, it was called Canadair, became Bombardier Aerospace, acquired a company called Learjet in the United States, acquired de Havilland, and Toronto, all iconic companies in this state, within this industry, I should say. But going to the point is, I design aircraft, and now I train people in aircraft. So I would tell you, those are two of the most important, elements of safety that you have in aircraft, that we should really give a lot of comfort to people flying aircraft. And let me illustrate what I mean. First and foremost, from my experience in designing aircraft, the thing you should remember, obviously, and the airplanes I designed, by the way, are to a certification standard called FAR Part 25, okay, or the equivalent for EASA in Europe, which is the European Certification Authorities, for
Yes.
CAE in the UK. And the standard basically, or it's one standard, but with, you can well imagine volumes and volume of individual regulations of how you design individual systems on the aircraft, how you design and certify the aircraft that it meets all the criteria for the airplane that's going to pass certification requirements. But the ultimate one, there's one golden rule that underlies everything with the certification of those aircraft. The aircraft that you and I will fly as passengers on is this simple rule, is that no single failure of anything on the aircraft can result in the loss of the aircraft. And that's why, for example, you have two engines on the plane, because clearly, if one fails, the aircraft has to be able to be certified, and it does, to be able to complete this flight. In some cases, do very long overwater flights to reach to an alternate location where it will quite nicely, land and be really unknown, or basically a benign event for the passengers. And that applies to every system on the aircraft. That get you so, and you think about the likelihood of any individual system to fail is extremely improbable, or two to fail is almost, unheard of,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it really doesn't happen, and that's the way it should be. So that's the number one thing,
Yeah.
which contributes to the fact that, and I'm sure you've talked about that many times in your program, is that that's one of the things that makes flying so safe, is inherently the safety of the airplanes themselves. And that's an evolving standard, by the way. That standard is not static. Every incident, anything that occurs, basically investigated, whether it be by the transportation safety boards in the UK, in Canada, in the US, anywhere where there's incidents or accidents, there's always a change to take the lessons learned and incorporate that into a way that new airplanes are going to be certified, or indeed basically bring back that increased regulation on existing aircraft. So that's number one. Your aircraft are very safe. And then now let's come to our pilots. First of all, there's two pilots. And those, and that by the way goes to the same kind of thinking, that no individual failure can cause a loss of aircraft. Well, you have two pilots. Where that's undergoes to the same kind of general philosophy of the rule. But then pilots, I can't think of another profession where literally, your job is on the line every 6 months of your whole career, because every 6 months, first of all, to get to be a pilot is a painstaking journey, okay, of learning, of pretty, tough, examinations to be able to achieve that. It takes, an inordinate amount of time. It can take up to 2 years, and that would be an accelerated way to become an airline pilot. And then again, every 6 months, going back into the simulator and being able to demonstrate that you still have the skills to be able to continue flying that aircraft safely. So I think should give a lot of confidence to people
Definitely.
on the safety of flying planes, and the basically training and skills of the pilots are continuously demonstrated. And you know what? With that in mind, I think that basically explains some of the reactions that you see sometimes. In fact, not sometimes, all the times, when something happens on an aircraft, the reaction of the crews. I'll give you an example. What I mean. There was about about 3-4 years ago, I think during COVID, I remember seeing a plane in the United States, which literally, I think it was a 777, that an engine was on fire, literally, and you saw it because people were filming on their phones outside of the porthole of the aircraft. They're feeling the fire, and people were somewhat concerned. Understandably so. It's not normal to have a fire on the engine. And as an engineer, I can tell you that's not normal. Clearly, let something happen and there's a fire, and they're filming. But then with that backdrop of people, kind of being understandably excited, you're hearing again, you're listening to this on the news, and you listen to the pilots on the radio. You're listening to talk to the controllers, and they're calm as day. They're calling in, yeah. Well, we have an emergency here. We'd like vectors back to the airplane, back to the airport. And meanwhile, they're talking to the passengers. Calm as day. And why is that? Why is that? Well, the reason is they've seen this before. Literally tens, hundreds of times. Every time you go, you're simulating those kind of things. So for them, it's another engine fire that they've seen many times before. And often what we hear from pilots, this resonates to me, what you hear from pilots when they have undergone an emergency that required them to take quick action to recover the aircraft, that basically they'll say their hands and their feet were moving before their brain even comprehended what was going on. And again, that goes to the power of training and retraining, and basically being ready, for what we call, and that's inherent, and actually the noble mission that we have as a company is the words, we prepare people for the moments that matter, and that clear is a moment that matter.
Yeah. You're the perfect guest, Marc. You chat away, which is perfect. Lots of great stuff that people will be hanging on to, going, crikey. I always wondered, when you're in the simulator, because it kind of raised two things for me. And one of them was like, when you're in there, so you said it feels exactly the same. But I always wonder how you sort of tell your brain it matters in this simulator as much as it does when I'm flying with passengers. Is there sort of like a slight disconnect, or is it instant? How does that play out for pilots?
Well, you know what we do, and this is very, very important, what we do in the whole training industry is to make sure that the experience in the simulator is from a, again, training point of view, exactly like the aircraft.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can tell you that taking a step back, I have the privilege, obviously, of, since I run the company, to be able to demonstrate simulators all the time to people around the world. And it's quite the experience. We give them off at charity raffles, at charity events. We raffle them off for silent auctions. And that always brings a good price, right? Because people go in this, and it's not something that you get a chance to do.
No.
A lot of times people with experiences, I didn't even know this existed, but it's such, a broad but very narrow industry, very focused. So, people love it. It's kind of a joyride. But as pilots, I can assure you it's not a joyride. It goes to the heart of your question. I could tell you after a 4-hour session, I am sweating, and I am not alone, because it feels extremely real. The experience of the aircraft, if you're experiencing, a situation, for example, that an engine fails or an engine fires, you have, just like you would have in every other craft, alarms going off, stick shakers going, and oral cues being given to you. And so it feels, as it should be, extremely like the aircraft. And that's the experience we create. And the other things and we as pilots have to react the same way. So I can tell you, there is a switch that goes off very, very quickly. That basically, as soon as I put my headset on, because we put our headsets on in the simulator, and I turn on those screens and I turn on the engines, I'm in the airplane.
Right.
And I think that I think you would find that same sentiment from anybody that realistically does this. It's just part of what we do. And, I think we're very proud to be able to contribute to be that element that makes, flying so safe.
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, it's obvious to me. I've been privileged to go in quite a few times, and they are amazing. People think, "Oh yeah, I've been in them," and I say, "No, you haven't been in a pilot spec." What I'm talking about is your flight. So,
Yeah, but it's not just pilots, by the way. And sorry, sorry, I hope you hold the thought, or maybe I can come back to it, because
it's all right. Yeah,
it's not just pilots, because I understand. I think, were you a cabin crew at some point?
yes, yeah.
Okay, well, you will know yourself. You will know yourself. The other, I talked about, we don't only train pilots, we train professionals in the aircraft, which includes cabin crew. So again, basically, I'll build on your experience as cabin crew and myself as designing aircraft. I talk about, when you design aircraft, that one of those philosophies is no single failure can result in the loss of the aircraft. Well, inherent in all those rules is, okay, well, what decides the number of doors there are in the aircraft, or how many emergency exits there are on the aircraft? Well, again, it goes to a certification requirement. That is a very important, and kind of, as if you're an aircraft engineer like myself, that requirement of how many doors or decides literally, how you're going to configure your aircraft is very, very important to the design of the aircraft. And so what decides that? What sizes that? It's one single requirement, one rule that says you have to be able to demonstrate that you can evacuate that aircraft in 90 seconds with half the emergency exits blocked. And by the way, you don't know which ones they're going to be. The cabin completely blanked out, and with debris strewn in the aisle. Okay, you have to design that from the beginning. Say, I need to have enough exits for that to happen. And then right when you get to the end of the process, when you built the first airplanes, you're way down the road, you have to actually do that test. You have to pick people that are not experts. So we would typically take employees, basically, that worked anywhere in the office, and say, hey, come on, we're doing a test tonight, and you're going to be part of it. And then we literally do that. We put people in a dark hangar at night in the aircraft. We block off half the exits. We throw debris in the aisle to simulate bins that have fallen. They have basically luggage in the middle of the aisle. Then a switch is activated, and a cabin crew say, evacuate, like you would have learned to do. And they demonstrate that they can do that. Again, it goes to the training, and you know how rigorous that training is.
It is.
Again, people I think have perhaps they don't even think about it. They would have a thinking that even though the statement is made that, well, the cabin crew is there for your safety. Well, they actually are actually there. That actually dictates how many cabin crew you need on the airplane. It's not how many you need to serve the meal. It's how many you need to be able to satisfy that requirement and all the others that they need to be able to demonstrate, like extinguishing all kinds of fires, that could occur on the aircraft from you dropping your cell phone between seats and it being crushed as you move your seat. So the whole system is basically have safety in mind all the time. It promotes everything that we do. Yeah. Again, with the result of the safety record that this industry has.
I love there's a couple of things I like about that, but the main thing for me is I like how joined up it all is. So you think you're in Canada, you've got a completely different background to me. Many years ago, I went through that route in the UK for one airline, and the same messages, that 90-second thing, half the doors blocked, all of that's exactly what we were trained in. And so I think for anybody listening to this, because we got listeners all over the place, you have this consistency across the world in the developed world where you're all working to the same standard, the same ethos.
Exactly. It's what we call globally harmonized training standards, and it makes sense, doesn't it? But the reason is an airplane takes off from Montreal and it's going to land in Heathrow, or it's going to land in Shanghai, or it's going to land in Sao Paulo. You would expect you inherently you would think that your pilots flying back and forth have to be certified and trained to be able to fly anywhere in the world, and no matter where they originate from. Okay, and again, that's part of the safety system. And the other thing that it makes this industry so different, I find, and so many other industries would take this as a model, is something we call a just culture. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but the industry is a just culture. What does that mean? It means that we reward people to come forward with mistakes that they've made for the betterment, and be very transparent with the mistakes that they made, to make sure that everyone else can take advantage of basically that mistake and learn from it. And that makes, and I'll give you an example. For example, in one system that exists, and this kind of system exists in most countries, but like in the United States, they have a NASA reporting system. Like if you make a mistake in aircraft, like I'll give you a mistake that can be made. You forget or actually something happened, you got distracted, or the autopilot did not capture an altitude as precisely as you wanted. You're supposed to level off at 34,000 feet or flight level 340, and you missed it. You blew through it. You're 200 feet higher, 300 feet higher. That's a mistake. And that's a reportable offense. That because you have to maintain the altitude that you have for obvious reasons of separations with other aircraft. So that if that happens, it's fairly, you would think, innocuous, but it's not. It's serious. But in spirit of just culture, you made that mistake. You have literally 10 days to make a report that says, hey, I did this, and you submit it, and basically you are rewarded to do that, because everyone, that will be incorporated system that everyone will be able to take advantage of and learn from it for the betterment of the industry. And you basically are rewarded for having been transparent with that fact.
I love that. And it's very rare. You get that kind of, no blame thing. You don't really get that in many other places. And a lot of pilots, when I've had them on podcasts, they've said very, very similar, that, they find it such a surprise when they go out with their normal friends and then they say they don't understand something. They go, what, you don't understand? I said, whereas in my workplace, I could say, I don't understand it. Can you tell me again? And it's not a big deal. And it's just those little things like that we just take for granted. It's just great to hear it from you as well. You know, it reinforces it. I was thinking, so the thing I was going to ask you about earlier on was like, to what extent all the simulator training, obviously you'd know how fantastic and how realistic it is. But when you're then flying a normal aircraft and something happens, in what way is there like a pause or like a startle effect that throws them out that's mitigated against because of the training?
Well, as I was saying a while ago, it's incredible how the brain works in terms of, people call it muscle memory or whatever. Triggering mechanisms are very similar. And in almost every case, when people are debriefed on incidents, they basically, yeah, of course there's a startling effect or anything. And, and people always say that our training kicked in, because you'll inherently have, okay, you'll have the startle factor, something happened, but in the end of the day, the cues that you will get are exactly you had in your training. An alarm bell went off. You had I was saying about a fire. You will have, your basically your oral warning will go fire, 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 and then you'll see a red flashing fire, fire. Okay, fire. Okay, okay, okay. Well, I've seen this before. What do I do? Okay, what do I do? Well, I'll go through my memory items, and my hands were going to identify exactly what I would be working with my co-pilot, and we'll go through. I'm the pilot flying. I'm flying. The pilot, my co-pilot, first officer, who actually is a pilot non-flying, will go through basically the emergency checklist, and we will go through this calmly, because we believe after the startle effect has hit us, which inevitably it won't be very long. It won't be very long, because again, and I'm not saying something that we haven't seen, hundreds, thousands of times. There's decades of history on this.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I was going to ask you just, because this has been really, really helpful for people, but aviation, old people always say, I want to know it's safe. And I say, well, it's as safe as it can be. It's not 100% safe, because nothing's 100%. Living's not 100% safe, but and it got me thinking, it's so safe because of all these things. Can you imagine a day where it is like 100%? It's not far off, I know, but can you imagine that?
Well, look, I think safety is never a destination. So it's a journey. It's a journey to me, and I think it's like anything else. It's like, in the workplace or occupational health and safety, you always aim for zero accidents, and in aviation, you will always aim for zero accidents. You can't control everything, but I do. The facts and the data will prove that we are doing a pretty darn good job. You'll be able to control and minimize the risks that exist in everything related to flying. Events will always happen to a certain extent, but statistically, they're extremely remote. Like, all these things that I talked about for myself and every other pilot. You train and you train, you train, and chances are actually extremely unlikely that anything would ever happen to me, and it's never happened. Statistically, just not going to happen to me. But again, statistically, again, because of just sheer volume of flights, it will happen to someone, and that person or that crew has to work together to minimize, whatever happened there, and with the result of, having a safe conclusion to the flight. So I think, again, it's a journey. I think we can always improve, and we will continue to improve. But again, if you look at again, I talk about 100,000 flights a day. Some statistics I was just gathering a few minutes ago is like, you just look at 2024, we reached a record in air traffic. You had, what was the number? Close to 5 billion passengers flying safely across internationally domestic routes. It's more than at any other time, of course, any time in history.
Yes.
Think about, accidents obviously make the news, something like that. But when you think about 5 billion passengers, 100,000 flights per day, the level of accidents that happen, it speaks volumes to how confident you and I or anybody else listening, how safe that they could feel flying in an aircraft.
I mean, that's Mark, was like your mic drop, wasn't it? Like those figures, they are just phenomenal. That for people, if they can get their head around that, what I want you to think about when you think about this to Mark here is that there's people, professionals like Mark, all over the world doing exactly this, and the CAE is a company that's global, committed to making it safer for you and everybody else that's traveling with you. And I'm very grateful for what you do. It's nice to know. But having seen some of your equipment, it's just mind blowing. I can't imagine it being even more realistic. So I took a friend in recently, and he was just blown away at how he said, "I know, I just couldn't imagine what it'd be like, to actually go in there. He said, you just feel like you're on a flight." I said, "Well, slight difference. You wouldn't be allowed on the flight deck normally, but apart from that, it's just mind blowing." So it's a fantastic job you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's the people at sea that make this happen every day. And we're all very proud of really the noble mission that we have is to make sure, and we do this, and it's so empowering to our people. We're in an organization. We have 13,000 employees. A lot of them, I think, you're in the UK. We have hundreds of people in the UK, probably, and which I'm sure will listen to this podcast. It really literally brings tears to the eyes of our people when basically one of the things, that I talk about, I show a picture of a child looking through a porthole of an aircraft and say, and it's real, what you do every single day contributes to that child having a safe flight.
Yeah.
And actually makes it sure that child has a safe flight. That's what keeps us going every day.
Fantastic. Mark, absolutely brilliant. Thank you very, very much for your time. Very grateful for it. And I'll let you know when this one's out, but this is going to be a really nice. People love to hear from experts, and to have you on is a real honor. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It was a pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.